Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining us. We'll give folks a minute or two to log on, and then we'll go ahead and get started. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us. Welcome to this Fleets for the Future Electric Vehicle Procurement webinar. My name is Sarah Reed, and I'm a program coordinator at the National Association of Regional Councils. If you should have any technical questions during the webinar, please email Cameron. His email is on your screen right now. It's cameron@narc.org. And there will be time for questions and discussion at the end of the presentation. If you have a question during the presentation, please type it into the questions box on your control panel on the right-hand side of your screen. A recording of this webinar will be available, and you can download the slides right now, also in the control panel under handouts. We also have the best practice documents available for download on your screen under handouts as well right now too. Great, let's get started. So today I'm pleased to be joined by Philip Krachik from Meister Consultants Group, a Cadmus company, who is our technical lead on this project, as well as Ryan Daly from the Electrification Coalition, one of our excellent electric vehicle experts. So our agenda today includes a background into the Fleets for the Future project before we focus in on electric vehicle procurement and information on fleet transition planning and financing. Please keep in mind that you can download the slides for closer viewing and that they will be available following this webinar as well. Fleets for the Future is a Department of Energy grant project led by the National Association of Regional Councils, with our main goals being to lower upfront costs for all types of alternative fuel vehicles by aggregating demand through cooperative procurement. We have also developed resources such as procurement best practices, timelines, and checklists to enable fleet managers to plan and optimize alt fuel vehicle usage across their fleets. Our project team consists of 16 partners, including technical advisors, regional council team members who have led their own procurements, as well as Clean Cities coordinators from across the country who you can see are on this slide now. As I mentioned, one of our goals is to create resources to guide fleets through procurement and incorporating alternative fuel vehicles into their fleets. Today we'll be discussing several of the best practice documents, which are also available on our website at fleetsforthefuture.org and in the handouts tab on your screen. This is a snapshot of some of the guides that are available. So our regions and our national partners have developed an extensive set of contracts that leverage cooperative procurement. If you represent a public fleet, you're likely able to piggyback on a number of these contracts on the screen. This includes a full spectrum of the most common alt fuel and electric vehicles that are most commonly used in the public sector, as well as a wide range of EV charging providers. This will not be the focus of today's webinar, but you can learn more about available opportunities at our upcoming webinars and conference presentations, as well as on our website. Lastly, before we turn it over to our technical experts, I wanted to poll the audience to learn a little bit more about this group. So some questions are going to pop up on your screen. It would be great if you could answer them. We'll leave this question open for another couple of seconds. Looks like we have a lot of municipal government fleets on this webinar today and nonprofit. So our next poll question is about the size of your fleet. Thanks, we'll go ahead and share this answer as well. Lots of really large fleets. And our third question is about your interest in following up and pursuing electric vehicle procurement. Thanks, we have one more question for you. Great, thanks. Looks like there's a pretty wide variety of interests for our webinar today. So now we'll go ahead and turn it over to Philip Krajcik, who is our technical team leader and an associate with Meister Consultants Group, a Cadmus company.
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes, hi, Philip.
And let me check and make sure that my screen is displaying and you can see the slides changing.
So just accept the request to share your screen.
Oh, I don't see that request. Let me see where. Can you resend it? Maybe we need to close the poll. All right.
Sorry about that, Philip. 1 second.
All right. Yep, okay. Show my screen.
Go ahead into presentation mode.
All right.
Perfect. Thank you.
Okay, well, thanks. It sounds like we have the right audience in the room, and you probably all reviewed the agenda before joining because it looks like you are interested in all the topics that we're going to be presenting about today. The one thing that I would note is that we are not planning to talk much about EV charging, and we have that as the focus of a future webinar coming up in late May. So keep your eyes peeled for that. But thanks for joining this morning, and I just wanted to walk you through the agenda real quickly. I'm going to be talking very briefly about the benefits of electric vehicles, and then give you a sneak preview of some of the findings that the things we've been finding in our efforts to implement bulk procurement in the program that Sarah just described. Then I'll turn it over to Ryan Daly from the Electrification Coalition to discuss technical considerations and financing and procurement options for EV deployment. So since I know I'm preaching to the choir, I'll keep this brief. The first benefit we see to EV procurement is that it has the potential to significantly contribute to air quality goals, attainment zones, and reduce criteria pollutants. The second benefit is the reduction of greenhouse gas emissions, with transportation responsible for nearly 30% of US emissions. Shifting it to sources that generate fewer emissions is important, as well as shifting to sources that can generate fewer emissions in the future. While emissions intensity varies quite a bit regionally, here's the projected well-to-wheels emissions of EVs versus conventional cars, assuming national average emissions factors from the AFDC. So the third reason we are really interested in electrification today is that it cuts our exposure to volatility. The fact that over 90% of our transportation energy comes from petroleum points to the importance of diversifying the energy supply. You can see in this graph here, prices over the past 15 years. The very bottom line there that's way below the rest of them is the cost of electricity per equivalent of gas gallon equivalent. And as you can see, not only the lowest, but it's also the most stable. And then finally, electrification helps us use US sourced energy inputs and infrastructure. So I wanted to start out by showing a comparison of the total cost of ownership of electric vehicles versus internal combustion vehicles. And to really underscore and emphasize the importance of taking a total cost perspective when looking at your deployment. It's really important to think not only about the upfront costs, but also ongoing costs. You can see on the far right-hand column our comparable internal combustion vehicle, a Ford Focus, and in the three other columns, various battery electrics and plug-ins. And I've highlighted the total cost of ownership per mile that Ryan Daly calculated for us a little while back. As you can see, battery electrics tend not to compete well unless you start to ramp up the amount of mileage that they're used. So in the base assumption, we have only 12,000 miles per year and gas at $2.25 a gallon. As gas starts to creep up, and we're seeing $3.50 a gallon gas in California and other parts of the country right now, you can see that economics flips, where the battery electric and the plug-ins are all doing better than an internal combustion vehicle. And that's with the monetization of the tax credit, which is going to be an important consideration for all the municipal and nonprofits in the audience today. So as I said, high utilization is really paramount for economic viability of an EV program. The previous slide assumed that either 12,000 miles or 15,000 miles per year on those vehicles, depending on which row you're looking at. But on average, government fleets tend to average about 7,000 miles per year for their sedans. And when you're looking at mileage utilization that low, you tend to see total cost of ownership being in excess of 50 cents per mile, which is not terribly competitive. So some of the solutions you should be thinking about is really picking the right vehicles for your electrification efforts, long duty cycles, high fuel consumption, significant idle time vehicles, places where the electric vehicles will really shine and help you reduce your fuel expenditures. Another consideration is really to consolidate miles onto your electric fleet and think about fleet right sizing. A lot of municipal fleets I know pool their vehicles and have opportunities to use fewer vehicles to get the same number of people to meetings in various parts of their jurisdictions, and really doing a deep dive into the necessity of the size of the fleet is really important. And then finally, maximizing the amount of electric VMT, miles traveled, versus miles traveled on gasoline, particularly if you're looking at plug-in hybrids, or if you're just looking at operator preferences, making sure that you have policies in place to ensure that those electric vehicles are used as much as possible. So now I'm going to jump into some of the applications best suited for electric vehicles. First, we want to ask the question of what type of EV best fits your needs. And in the light duty sector, obviously the biggest decision is between battery electrics and plug-in hybrids. And obviously on the battery side, you have a much simpler solution. There's no none of the internal combustion maintenance because they don't have that component of the powertrain. But on the plug-in side, you've got flexibility where you if you have a couple use cases where you're driving long distances, or if you have an operator that forgot to plug it back in, you still have the availability of that vehicle to accomplish your needs for the day. And with plug-in vehicles, as I mentioned, you're gonna, with plug-in hybrids, you'll especially want to be wary of making sure that as many of the miles are driven on electric fuel as opposed to on gasoline. So moving to the heavy duty and medium duty space, again, the same sort of attributes are important. Looking for vehicles that return to base, have long duty cycles and high fuel consumption, and idle a lot, as well as long latency times at predictable places. Those give opportunities for opportunity charging and off-shift charging. Some of the vehicles that are coming out, and this market is really characterized by niche manufacturers that are just starting to scale now. But we're seeing a lot of options in transit buses emerging, bucket trucks for utilities becoming more often plug-in hybrids, delivery and box trucks, for instance, those that would be made by a Zenith Motors or a Motive, and yard trucks for hauling waste around or loading in various places. And Orange EV is one of those vendors. Moving on to school buses, we're seeing a lot more options pop out. A couple years ago, it was really only a couple very small manufacturers, but now we're starting to see the bigger entities get into the game, with Bluebird and Daimler and Thomas Built announcing plans and unveiling buses this year and into the coming year. We're also seeing a lot of interest and success around some of these retrofit hybrid vans and step vans, things like XL Hybrid or Lightning Hybrid or Workhorse. And these are starting to integrate with the major OEMs. Ford's Qualified Vehicle Modifier program being known as EQVMs, the QVM being those modifiers. And then other types of vehicles, we're seeing a lot of work trucks and pickups from a wide range of companies, as well as passenger shuttles. So I'm going to jump in to tell you some very preliminary findings based on our personal experience working with fleets through the Fleets for the Future project, trying to find economies of scale and best available pricing for municipal and nonprofit fleets. So in our experience, I'll start with the sort of bad news, which may not be terribly surprising for a number of you in the audience, but buying cooperatives and state contracts do not seem to receive large discounts from the large OEMs on your standard battery electric or plug-in hybrid sedan to date. And we found that the bulk procurement savings that you might achieve from such a campaign are typically significantly less than the federal EV tax credit. And the implication of this is that it's really important to think through how to monetize that tax credit if you're a public sector or nonprofit fleet that's looking to electrify. The second thing is that there really are significant savings associated with the value of staff time in pursuing cooperative procurement. So while the purchase price may not look all that impressive, you will and may only have a small savings relative to MSRP or other potential procurement avenues. You do get a significant amount of staff time freed up from not having to do a compliant procurement all on your own. And so cooperatives are really useful entities that can save you money. One of our regional partners estimated their savings on a per vehicle basis to be about anywhere from $1,500 to about $5,000 per procurement they were able to avoid. And then fleet tail discounts are sometimes provided by some of the major OEMs, and they can significantly cut the purchase price for models at very specific times. And so this means it's really important to pay attention to times that OEMs may be looking to aggressively move vehicles. Maybe it's a new model year or new types of vehicles being more attractive, and they're wanting to make sure they reduce their inventory. And then finally, time-limited EV group buys that are offered through local dealerships have had significant success. So it's important to keep in touch with your local dealers and stay engaged. An example of this that we did through our project was some of our building on the work that was done by the Electrification Coalition and Southwest Energy Efficiency Project back in, I believe it was 2015 and 2016, to pioneer some of these electric vehicle group buys for citizens in various cities and towns in Colorado. Our project team did a similar campaign in Kansas City. And they worked with 5 dealerships in the region as well as their local utility, and ran a campaign for a couple months, then extended it for another calendar quarter after those initial months due to the success that they had originally. They had, within 45 days, 100 Leafs purchased, which was Nissan Leafs, which was an 87% year-over-year increase. And during that calendar quarter and the following calendar quarter, Kansas City was the fastest growing EV market in the US, in no small part due to this program. They also found that they were able to replicate it and continue to promote the campaign with some other local partners in a follow-up campaign. So EVs and bulk procurement, in terms of our moving on to the medium and heavy duty space, as you all know, this is an area characterized by smaller manufacturers with vehicles that are not typically eligible for the federal tax credit. And since these vehicles are very expensive, the economics are often driven by vouchers and/or pilot initiatives. As such, it's really hard to get municipalities to purchase unless the campaign coincides with a period when one of these voucher programs is open. But one of the positive things that we found is that since these manufacturers are still scaling and trying to get footholds with new customers, they've been showing willingness to provide more significant price breaks for bulk procurement. And we've seen this both on the turnkey vehicle side as well as the upfit side. And some examples include a campaign that we ran in the Boston area last fall with some project partners, where we saw just the act of getting 26 orders queued up for XL hybrids enabled them to get pricing of between 11 and 19% on 2 different vehicle models that XL was able to upfit for them. And the majority of them, I believe, were Ford Transit vans. And this was a savings of $1,000 to $2,000 per vehicle. Another a positive experience we had was working with Zenith Motors, and we found that they were willing to also give discounts during a time-limited campaign that were beyond the discounts they give to participating in buying Cooperative. So an additional 2% discount, and that's quite significant when you look at the base price of that vehicle. So moving on to the high-level conclusion really is that more efforts in this space may yield significant benefits for public fleets in the future. Finally, our experience with infrastructure is that providers often discount their hardware by significant margins for members of cooperative procurement programs. And this is really specific to the equipment and not so much to the installation. But we've seen it on state contracts as well as the contracts we worked with NJPA to develop on EV charging. Here's a summary of some of the results that that we got from that EV charging solicitation with National Joint Powers Alliance back in 2017. And this contract is one of those that Sarah mentioned that's available for any public or nonprofit entity that could use. But if you look at that first column, the amount of discount that the manufacturers were willing to give on hardware tended to range from about 15 to 30% for level 2 charging, and in the range of 5 to 15% for DC fast charge. So with that, I'm going to turn things over to Ryan Daly from the Electrification Coalition to dive into some considerations around fleet transition planning and financing for alt-fuel vehicles.
Great, thank you, Philip. Are you guys able to hear me?
Yes, hi Ryan, everything looks great. Thank you.
Excellent, my pleasure. Thank you for having me today, and thank you everybody for joining. My name is Ryan Daly, and I work with the Electrification Coalition. Electrification Coalition, as well as other stakeholders around the country, to help with fleet transition planning, making the move to advanced vehicle technologies and specifically electric vehicles. So we're going to talk through some of the reasons or some of the methods that we use in this respect. So a quick note on why fleets are really good candidates for electrification, given the characteristics of fleet operations, makes them really good targets. And a couple of the things here we've touched on over the course of the presentation, but one of the key components is that fleets typically look at vehicle assets from a total cost of ownership approach, which makes it relatively easy to make a comparison between different technologies when you consider the cost over the total lifetime of the vehicle. In some cases, but not all, route predictability makes for a very easy transition. And then in the same case, not all fleets, but some fleets have high utilization rates, which makes the economics of the transition more attractive. The use of central parking facilities can really help enable decision-making when it comes to the rollout of infrastructure to support these vehicles. The critical piece of the cost of maintenance in managing a fleet can really help with the economics of the transition to electric vehicles, which have significantly fewer moving parts and therefore significantly lower maintenance costs. They don't have to have oil changes, et cetera. The lower cost of fuel, which was already touched on, and then, depending on the use case that the vehicle is put into, an actual return on the upfront investment to acquire the new technology can be achieved in relatively short time frames in those high utilization scenarios. And then lastly, contributing to the sustainability initiatives of particular organizations. Now, how we approach the transition to electric vehicles is really focused on data-driven decision-making to ensure that the right technologies are placed into the right applications and that they do not disrupt operations to any significant extent. Those of us who've been involved with fleet for a long time know the all too frequent horror stories where vehicles are placed into the wrong application and a new technology does not function as promised or as hoped in a fleet. And so what we really focus on is doing some of that upfront due diligence of using fleet operational and telematics data, which many of you probably already have. We apply analytics and data science to that and then help develop data-driven procurement and ongoing management of this new technology. And at the end of the day, the idea is to simplify the adoption of electric vehicles. Our number one goal as an organization is really to speed and grow the adoption of electric vehicles, both in fleets and beyond, and feel that some of this upfront due diligence can be helpful in that respect so that everybody feels comfortable that they're putting this new technology into the right applications. So, planning for EVs, looking at total cost of ownership. The place that we typically start with a fleet would be by conducting a baseline total cost of ownership analysis. This looks at all the operational costs of a particular vehicle and then compares them to the acquisition of a new internal combustion engine vehicle versus the acquisition of a new electric or plug-in hybrid vehicle. We can factor in whether or not your organization can take the tax credit, and then look for the scenario in which we're finding vehicles that, quote unquote, look good on paper from an economic standpoint, so that we can identify the candidates that we want to potentially take a deeper dive with. And so the example that we have up here compares a Chevy Cruze to a Nissan Leaf, and we see that with this particular vehicle at 20,000 miles per year, a Leaf is going to save about $6,500 over the life of the vehicle. Now, as Philip alluded to, as those mileage figures come down, closer to 10,000 miles per year or below, the economics do change. And then it becomes really critical to understand whether or not or how you can capture the tax credit to enable the economics to work out for the electric vehicle over the long term. From there, we typically then work with fleets who have some of the more complicated or higher use applications to understand how that baseline scenario fits into their actual operational needs. And what we do here is use telematics data to analyze drive cycles and ensure that EV and fueling infrastructure are deployed into the most successful application. And so once we've identified the candidates on paper, we can take this deeper dive with the folks that have the data already or want to pursue telematics data. And really the idea here is to understand how speed, distances, and driving style impact vehicle performance as if that vehicle were already an EV. We can see make and model specific recommendations to see which EVs are best for you. And in this way, we do two things. One, we ensure that the operational needs of your organization and particular vehicles are going to be met by a particular technology, but also that you're putting the right type of vehicle to the right application. And really, this is to kind of prevent overbuying, right? We may not all need a Chevy Bolt to fill all of our needs. More often, we can probably do just fine in a Nissan Leaf or even down into a Ford Focus with a smaller battery. Of course, there's also going to be scenarios where a plug-in hybrid is going to be more appropriate, and the duty cycle is really going to require some times where it needs the longer distance range and the backup gasoline engine. And then there are also scenarios where the numbers just don't work, and we will recommend that people stick with an internal combustion engine vehicle. So the other nice thing about telematics and this kind of deeper operational dive is the inherent value of GPS data to show us how routes, times, and parking locations, as well as durations of those parking instances, will inform infrastructure needs. And sorry, I'm going to go back one slide. The main point of this part of the analysis is really to help optimize the number of chargers that are rolled out to support these vehicles. Some of the prevailing wisdom that we typically come up against is the idea that a fleet needs one level 2 charger to support every vehicle that comes into the fleet. And our typical hypothesis is that that number is actually somewhere less than 1. And if your vehicles are parking, 12, 14, 16 hours overnight, they're going to have the opportunity to become fully charged using standard level 1 charger, and that you may not need to make the larger investment in the more the higher level infrastructure. And this way, we can then look at vehicles in different facilities and optimize the rollout of infrastructure to serve the operational needs of the fleet and keep overall project costs down and retain the economic benefit of the transition to electric vehicles. So a couple of points on managing EV deployments within fleets. Proper education and training is really critical. We actually ran into a scenario earlier this week where both the dealership and a fleet manager had been telling the employees of a fleet that once their plug-in hybrid ran out of battery, that the vehicle would go into quote-unquote limp mode and just enough to get them home, not at all realizing that the backup gasoline engine kicks in seamlessly and there's no operational difference. So making sure that we do proper educating of fleet, employees, and management is really critical. And then taking a data-driven approach to management really to help ease the transition to new technologies. Maintenance and tech training is critical within this as well. There's a number of good programs that we can recommend and point people to make sure that their vehicle technicians are properly educated on vehicle maintenance, and that electricians who work in the area are properly trained on infrastructure maintenance. And then again, data management and telematics. So with that, we'll transition to EV financing, or really procurement opportunities here. And there's kind of two interesting things I want to hit on here, just the opportunity and the challenge with doing this. There are many benefits, and we've hit on those today for the transition to electric vehicles, but it is difficult to make the transition, and we want to help ensure that fleets do it correctly and they do it well, so that we can avoid the scenarios where the wrong vehicle is put into the wrong application, and then it kind of slows down the rest of the technology deployment in other fleets when they see that a vehicles in certain applications are not performing like they're promised. And so one is, creating the compelling financial case to make sure that vehicles are going to fit your right sizes and use cases, conducting those financial and operational analyses, and then really understanding how your organizational budget and procurement rules are going to impact your decision. This is the difference between operating and capital budgets, where vehicles might be slated into one bucket and facilities and charging infrastructure and fuel are in a separate line item. And then what options are available to you? Is it typically an RFP and outright purchase? is leasing available to you, or is, as we've been working to develop, a cooperative purchasing option also available to you. So with that, I just want to spend kind of the last little bit of this on the kind of primary procurement options that we have been involved with over the course of the last couple of years. And this is really about driving an increase in EV deployments by disrupting the status quo, and making sure that you explore what options are available to you. The easiest thing to do is stick with the status quo and do what has always been done. And we've seen some of those more traditional RFP processes play out over the last couple of years. In Columbus and Atlanta in particular. Atlanta is actually getting ready to issue an RFP here fairly soon. But I want to talk about real quick what the experience in Columbus, because that's really been a pretty interesting process to follow, where they did issue an RFP. And then on the other side of it came out with a leasing option that was very, very different than anything that they had ever done. But it ultimately ended up providing the right solution for them. And so it ended up kind of being a combination of traditional RFP along with fleet management services. And then kind of in the middle of this is the cooperative aspect of it. We very much understand the need to ensure competitively bid vendors. And one of the nice things about what NJPA does is it takes that burden off of the individual member organization. It competitively solicits the contracts on your behalf and then awards those contracts to the qualifying vendors, and leaves you, the fleet, with options as to which vendors you would want to work with that have already been vetted and gone through the competitive process. So this is a place where fleet procurement is still kind of newish, and so we're really hoping that as we continue to develop this program, that we can get some additional successes for fleet procurement in the cooperative purchasing arena. And again, the last thing I will mention in both of these cases, both with fleet management service and the cooperative purchasing, is the option to work with leasing companies who can monetize tax credits and pass some of those savings on to you, the fleet. One of the other interesting things about both procurement options, but specifically in the cooperative space, is the option to procure all the other things that you're going to need to deploy these vehicles. So the infrastructure, the construction and installation services, telematics, fleet management services, et cetera. And so NJPA, while not maybe the first thought in everybody's mind for where to go get all their fleet stuff, is now becoming an increasingly valuable option for our stakeholders. So with that, I think that I will pass it back.
Thank you so much, Ryan, and thank you, Philip. So we just have one more slide before I'm going to open it up for questions. So just a reminder, if you have questions, to type them in the question box on the right hand of your screen. Also there is where the slides and the best practice documents are, if you're interested in downloading those. So we will have both Ryan and Philip back in June to hopefully do a similar webinar focusing on EV supply equipment like charging station procurement. So stay tuned on that. And if you're already on our email list, we'll be sure to send it out that way. And if you're not, you can email me at Sarah, S-A-R-A-H, at narc.org to be added. But I know a lot of folks seem to be interested in that aspect, so we'll do a whole separate webinar on that. And then also, I just wanted to highlight 2 other upcoming opportunities to learn more about the Fleets for the Future project in general and about opportunities for procurement. So we will be at the ACT Expo in Long Beach next Monday, and you can find information on that on the ACT website Monday afternoon. And then also, if you're a member of the NIGP Institute for Public Procurement, we'll be doing a webinar for them on more of the basics about Fleets for the Future and our regional and national procurements. So I'm going to open it up to questions. It looks like we've had a couple come in, so I will read. So our first question is, this person will be having staff take electric vehicles home, and they're wondering, are there any policies in place by any government agency on how to deal with the costs for home charging and being part of a EV station network like a Blink? Ryan or Philip, do you guys?
Yeah.
I haven't heard of this. Yeah.
I can speak to this. It's very uncommon at this particular point. The most kind of hands-on experience that I had with that was in Indianapolis a couple of years ago. And basically the program was set up such that all the vehicles had telematics so that they could know when the vehicle's plugged in at residential facilities. People aren't going to put in networked infrastructure at home. So the telematics was critical to make sure that it captured those charging events and then the amount of energy that was put into those vehicles, and the employees were then reimbursed at a set kilowatt hour rate each month for the energy that they put into those vehicles at home. But it's uncommon, and I don't know of standard policies to facilitate that, but we can certainly look into it.
Yeah, this is Philip, and I would say that Ryan covered that pretty well. Generally speaking, I think that that sort of program has a lot of interesting implications for education and may have some benefits, but it does bring a lot of complexity and underscore the need for telematics, as well as the need for making sure that you think through the optics of it from a public stewardship of public resources perspective. And I would think maybe it might be worth looking to whether some utilities may have done some of this in some of their EV deployment campaigns for their own staff. I'm not sure whether I've seen any examples, but I could think of a few places to look.
Thank you both. And as you can see, Ryan and Philip's contact information is on the screen now if you wanted to follow up on anything in this presentation. So our next question is, are there any updates on heavy construction equipment, electric vehicle solutions like bulldozers, compactors, trash trucks? So
for the purposes of the Fleets for the Future project, we focused on the vehicles that we were hearing the most interest in from our stakeholder fleets. So we had 5 different regions around the country that were contributing to this effort, and they all did a survey back at the project outset to understand the size of the fleets that were under municipal control and the intentions of replacing those vehicles. And as such, we came up with a rough list of vehicles that we would prioritize, and that did include a number of heavy-duty vehicles as well as medium and light-duty vehicles. But on the heavy-duty side, it didn't extend to construction vehicles simply because we didn't hear the interest from the surveys that we put out. We did get significant interest in refuse haulers and in school buses, not necessarily just electric, but alt fuels broadly. And so we've been working with some of the vendors on the National Joint Power Alliance contracts to highlight some of those vehicles that exist and are available for public procurement, but nothing on the construction vehicle side.
Thanks, Philip. And we had somebody say that Con Edison's Smart Charge New York uses the telematics method to allow payment for home charging, just I think as a follow-up to that first question. Our next question is—
Oh, great. That's a good example.
Great.
Okay. How much does an audit of current school bus and police fleets cost so that a municipality can compare current use to EV use?
Well, that's a loaded question. It depends. Yeah, I don't mean to be cute there, but it really does depend on the number of vehicles we want to look at, kind of the duration of the audit, what data collection methodologies are available to you or that you are currently using, and then making sure that we've got kind of the right audit tools to translate that onto the appropriate drivetrains for the vehicles you're interested in. Most of the stuff that I personally have done has focused in the light duty space, but I would be happy to follow up offline, and anybody who's interested in trying to pencil out what that would look like.
Thanks, Ryan. I'll be sure to share with you guys the questions afterwards as well, and the askers. Do the joint procurements work for all states?
I can take a first crack at that one. So many of the national purchasing cooperatives maintain current information about state cooperative procurement policies and state procurement regulations, and they, at least in the case of National Joint Powers Alliance, they post a link to all these sources on their website, and they do not provide legal advice to municipalities that would want to participate in terms of interpreting those guidelines, but from a high-level perspective, they have members in every state and they have significant sales in every state. So at least certain entities have decided it fits within their procurement strategy to do that. And the other part of this question is that some states may have state bid lists and state contracts that they have their state agencies procure off as a priority to do that before looking at cooperative procurements, particularly at the state level agencies. But one of the differences between state contracts and a contract put out by NJPA or one of their peers like HGAC BUY or US Communities is that typically the national cooperatives have full catalog procurement solutions, which enable municipalities and state agencies to get vehicles with the specific specifications that they need and not be limited to a smaller subset of those vehicles that is often the case with state procurements.
Thank you, Philip. Be sure to keep sending in your questions if you have them. What entities have used Fleets for the Future processes to procure electric vehicle fleets?
So we don't have the full records of how many sales have been made off of the contracts because NJPA is a partner that's not part of our grant. They were selected as a collaborator after the grant was awarded, and so we have not gotten all the details on the vehicle sales that they've had, but we have seen some press releases that communities have made in the recent past. City in California, for instance, put out a press release about their procurement of several EVs and EV charging stations, as well as a couple other types of vehicles via NJPA contracts. And we know that the large list of cities that were collaborating with LA had significant interest in funneling some of that demand through NJPA as a way to save time and effort for their aggregation of collaborators. So I can't speak to the total volumes on the contracts, but I know that we've been getting significant interest, and when we've talked with people in the state agencies and municipalities, they're very interested in learning about the discounts that are available.
Thanks, Philip. And I would add that for our regional procurements, like Philip mentioned, in Kansas City and then also in Boston, municipalities in those areas have participated through Fleets for the Future in the regional capacity. Are there any pilot programs available to interested municipalities? If so, how do you find out about such programs?
Pilot in what sense? Pilot the vehicles versus pilot the analyses or audits? I'll just address both. How about it? So on the vehicle side, Nissan in particular is really good about this, but I think the other manufacturers will do it as well, where they will have a demo vehicle that they could lend to a fleet for a short period of time, typically a week or two, and then they rotate that vehicle around. And then, on the audit side of things, most of the fleets that we have worked with have really focused on a small subset of the fleet right out of the gate to pilot both the audit and kind of going through that process, but then also, kind of thinking about a quote unquote pilot program for the deployment of EVs. And so that really kind of narrows the focus and kind of keeps everybody comfortable with the short-term economics, so they don't try and bite off more than they can chew. And so depending on the size of the organization, that might be 5 vehicles, it might be 50, just depending on how big the fleet is.
Yeah, and I would add that in our project structure, we also had designed it such that we did a number of pilots in the early phases and picked certain things to replicate. So the Kansas City region was our first region out of the gate by design, and they were learning some of the lessons around cooperative procurement first in order to share some of those findings with the remaining 4 regions. And then the Boston Regional Council, the MAPC, did an initial purchase with Cambridge and the state of Massachusetts, and based on the success of that pilot project that I talked about briefly, they are looking to expand it with the same partners to a larger number of vehicles and try to add in additional neighboring municipalities that might want to pilot with just 1 or 2 vehicles, but also capture the benefits of being part of a larger cooperative effort in terms of getting access to good pricing. So it's very much a part of the way we design the program. We don't necessarily have a specific pilot that we can offer through Fleets for the Future. But Ryan spoke to some of the ways that you could pilot your studies or your own initiatives, building on some of the lessons that we can share with you.
Thank you both. What is the best way for Clean Cities coalitions to work with you on this initiative?
So that's a good question. You want to go first, Philip? I got ideas on this too.
Sure, yeah. So if we're talking about Fleets for the Future, since this is a webinar hosted by Fleets for the Future, but it's primarily focused on electric vehicles and learning about how to deploy them, I think you could look at that question in 2 ways. But I'll take the Fleets for the Future perspective, and then maybe Ryan can talk more broadly about how Clean Cities coalitions can work with us beyond the time frame of the Fleets for the Future grant on expanding interest and deployment in electric vehicles. From a Fleets for the Future perspective, we have gotten to a stage where we're about 3/4 of the way through our grant period, and we've developed a number of contracts, which Sarah showed a very brief slide summarizing at the very beginning of this hour. And we have worked with a number of Clean Cities already to spread the word about the contracts that are available. But to the extent that Clean Cities can continue to play that outreach role to help educate people about cooperative procurement benefits and electric vehicle benefits and the availability of ready-made procurement solutions that they can use that will check all the boxes in making a compliant procurement. That's probably the most useful thing that Clean Cities coordinators can do in the remaining months of this project through September. We've been discussing the possibility that Clean Cities coordinators may serve a role in furthering cooperative procurement well beyond Fleets for the Future and potentially being the curators of resources about all the different alt fuel and electric vehicle cooperative contracts that are available to fleets, so that in the future people from municipal and nonprofit fleets will understand what's available on NJPA, what's available through HGAC BUY, what's available through state contracts, and how they could go about evaluating the suitability of those contracts to source their vehicles. Ryan, did you want to take on additional thoughts on that question?
Yeah, I would just say, right now, for the Clean Cities coordinators out there, just get in touch with us and follow up. With Fleets for the Future, we've worked closely with Clean Cities. We work closely with them in Smart Columbus in Ohio, and with a number of our other projects around the country, both in Atlanta, Northern Colorado, Rochester, et cetera. So please just reach out and let's talk about some of the work that we've been doing to figure out how to carry Fleets for the Future and the procurement effort beyond DOE funding, as well as some of our other programs, and then I think we can, find interesting ways to work together.
Thank you both. And I'm going to go ahead and close it out. So do either of you guys have any final thoughts?
I would just echo what Ryan said in response to the Clean Cities question, but more broadly for any of you on the line today, do not hesitate to reach out, and we would love to collaborate and work on these issues in the future through the Fleets for the Future banner or through other ways to engage on advancing electric vehicles. And so I'm really happy to have gotten the engagement from all you as participants, and really hoping that this was useful.
Yeah, I'll just echo that and thank everyone for their time. And please do reach out if you have any interest in discussing Fleets for the Future and procurement or our electric vehicle initiatives outside of this program. I mean, they're all kind of related at the end of the day, and our role, and mine specifically within the Electrification Coalition, is to help fleets figure out how to do this. And so if you're interested, just let us know, and we'd be happy to find a way to work with you.
Thank you both again. And as a reminder to everybody, you'll receive an email within the next day or so with a link to both the recording of this and the slides. And you can also visit our website at fleetsforthefuture.org to learn more about this project. So thank you again for your attendance. And like Ryan and Philip said, don't hesitate to reach out with any questions. Have a good rest of your day. Thank you.